remember it had like a small remote that I guess you get an app and it records for you. I need to figure out something. It came with my stand, but I don't know if I'll ever use it. What's up, guys? It's your boy Chrysalis here, and today for day 4, I believe it's day 4, yes, we are going to be ranking all of Paul Thomas Anderson's feature-length films. All 10 of them. So this will serve as kind of a minor spoiler for my eventual review of One Battle After Another, but you already know I think it's fantastic. If you caught my last couple of videos, you already know I think it's just fantastic and phenomenal and one of the best movies of the year, if not the decade. I just can't wait to finally expound on why it is so fantastic. That review should be coming sometime this week. Promise. Cross my heart, hope to die. But in the meantime, I'm actually going to cover not just that movie, but his 9 other movies preceding it, since Paul Thomas Anderson has had a fascinating career as a filmmaker. Right before he put out his, to my knowledge, his first honest-to-God action movie with One Battle After Another, he's done quite a few other types of movies. He's done from the romantic comedy Punch Drunk Love to the weird neo-noir film Inherent Vice. I will say he definitely leans more towards a lot of the psychological dramas such as The Master, such as Magnolia. He's done all different types of movies under the sun, but a good bit of them all have his one signature mark that is unmistakably him, at least from one point to now anyway, which I'll get to in a minute. So I'm not going to go from what I think is his worst movie to what I think is his best movie, at least not from number 10, 9, 8, 7, etc. I'm actually going to start with his very first movie and then kind of go around his filmography to work my way to his most recent film, because I think that would be more interesting, and I also feel like I would end up covering his filmography as a whole that way. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. By the way, shout out to, well, I got this from Second and Charles, but shout out to McKay's for providing me with, or being able to provide me with physical copies of just about all of Paul Thomas Anderson's work that I didn't already have on physical. Support your secondhand stores for this reason in particular. You never know when they might all be gone one day. And also just a quick shout out to the Criterion Collection. Put more Paul Thomas Anderson in the collection. Please and thank you. They have the nerve to put Punch Drunk Love and Magnolia on their Criterion Channel app, but not put anything else in the collection. The heck? So like I said, I'm going to start off with his very first movie, and that is the crime film, as Wikipedia is putting it. I don't really think it's a crime film all that much. I guess there's crime that happens. But this is going to be a movie called Hard 8. Fun fact, it was originally going to be called Sydney, based on Philip Baker Hall's character in Midnight Run. But, you know, Hard 8 just was catchier, I suppose. But yeah, just get this out of the way, I really don't think anybody thinks this movie is phenomenal. I mean, if they do, it's more so in the context of just what all came out in 1996 and, to one extent or another, what all came out in the 90s. Obviously, I think this movie is good. I think this movie is pretty solid and definitely a good first movie for a career like Paul Thomas Anderson's, or a career for any filmmaker for that matter. Philip Baker Hall's performance is stellar. I liked both John C. Reilly and Samuel L. Jackson in this movie. Gwyneth Paltrow was also solid as well. More so, I think the strongest thing about the film is, of course, just the overall acting, and as well as just the direction from Paul Thomas Anderson, which is pretty impressive considering, again, this is his very first movie. That being said, I don't think there's a whole lot that's exceptional about this film. I think, namely, when I think of negatives about it, I think the movie just has all these narrative arcs that just end just so quickly and so suddenly, or at least I feel that way. I remember watching it for the first time and thinking to myself how, despite how long the movie was, like 107 minutes, I'm pretty sure, there really just ended up not being a whole lot. Not like with one of his later releases, Punch Drunk Love, which is literally just a little shy of the 90-minute mark, or a little past the 90-minute mark, I mean. And it just felt like there was a lot more substance to it versus with Hard Eight. And I remember watching it and thinking to myself, this feels like it was a short film, but just with a lot more just stuffed into it. And I was kind of right, because this ended up being an expansion of one of Paul Thomas Anderson's short films called Cigarettes and Coffee. Again, not a bad movie, and certainly a great start for what would end up being just a solid and fascinating filmography later down the road. But as far as like just in the context of said filmography, Hard Eight just not quite one of the standouts for sure. But then Buckle Up right after Hard Eight, it's just movie city. It's just cinematic classic city from here. Like, holy shit. Because after Hard Eight, he ends up putting out a movie called Boogie Nights. Holy fuck. So in addition to Philip Baker Hall, who I think has a minor role in this film, returning for the movie along with John C. Reilly, Philip Seymour Hoffman, who has a brief cameo in Hard Eight that's what I found pretty memorable. This movie also has Burt fucking Reynolds. You got Julianne Moore in this movie. Don Cheadle. You got Marky Mark in this movie. What in the heck? You've got Alfred Molina in a scene where he's just on drugs and unhinged and crashing out when he figures out he's being robbed. Where did this come from? Where did this fucking guy come from? Yeah, I loved Boogie Nights when I watched it. Boogie Nights just definitely scratched the right itch for what it is I want from a movie in so many ways. Just a really interesting movie that, through the microcosm that is the porn industry of the 70s, by the way, keep this in mind, his very first period piece, technically, was able to explore America's relationship with the idea of art versus business. And those two just never really gone hand to hand all that well. It's a fantastic movie, and I definitely recommend Boogie Nights. The only thing I can say about it that I can see as a negative about Boogie Nights is something that also, in a way, plagued him with Hard Eight, and to an extent plagued him with Magnolia, but not really all that much, is the fact that with this movie, Paul Thomas Anderson kind of still holding on to his influences. You can definitely tell that from the narrative structure, from the character dynamics and all that, and even, I guess, a lot of the way the movie was shot as well. It felt like he was under the shadow of, say, a Martin Scorsese movie. Which, I mean, is not really an insult per se, considering that, well, Martin Scorsese is one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. But if you're trying to really just make your own mark in the world of film artistically, then you really gotta like tighten up and try to find something that is just unmistakably you. But from here, I don't really think any other films really have that issue throughout the rest of his filmography, even if, again, Magnolia feels pretty Robert Altman-esque. The only thing I can think of is maybe, say, Licorice Pizza, that has shades of contemporaries like Wes Anderson and a few other filmmakers, as well as just it feeling pretty self-referential. Licorice Pizza being really good, and I definitely recommend it. I don't think it's as bad as a lot of people are making it out to be. I'm not really sure where that comes from. It's super well shot, and I will say it is heavily carried by Cooper Hoffman's performance, which is fan-fucking-tastic, by the way, as well as Alana Haim from, well, the singing trio Haim, if I'm pronouncing her last name correctly. Just also delivering a pretty phenomenal performance as well. I think the shades of surrealism between the two characters' romance kind of harkens back to Punch Drunk Love in a way. Good movie, it's a solid film. It just feels like that I'm thinking back to like Boogie Nights and whatnot, where it feels like a lot of ideas just feel eerily familiar. Again, good movie, but where's the Paul Thomas Anderson I know? Which is kind of wild to say considering that Licorice Pizza came out in 2021. But yeah, as far as where Paul Thomas Anderson really kind of sort of starts taking off and just kind of evolving in terms of quality, you definitely got to talk about Magnolia. Magnolia is not a casual viewing experience. Magnolia is therapy. But yeah, Magnolia is a 3-hour long psychological drama with all these different stories, and some of them intertwine with each other and some of them don't. But all of them are linked in this kind of overlapping themes of like guilt, abuse, trauma, wasted potential, just all that stuff going on. Not only that, but it houses one of, if not Tom Cruise's best performance as an actor in his entire career. Definitely at least one of them for sure. Which I know Paul Thomas Anderson was very excited about, since I've read how much he loves Tom Cruise. Yeah, Magnolia is one of those films that reminds me that sometimes you're not watching a movie to be entertained or invigorated. You're watching a movie to confront a lot of negative things and existential things about yourself that you're either putting to the side but letting it just eat away at you. You are not watching Magnolia to feel good. You're watching Magnolia to feel like shit. And it just does an exceptional job at that. Almost too good of a job at that. I love Magnolia. It's not really a movie I'll watch like again and again and again for, the reasons I stated. But other than that, yeah, Magnolia just definitely his best film pre-period piece era. Because after a certain point, after Punch Drunk Love, Paul Thomas Anderson would embark on this whole escapade that is kind of this journey through American history in a lot of ways. Or at least the side of American history that is not really talked about. But obviously, before I get into that, I gotta talk about Punch Drunk Love. In the same way that he was very excited to work with Tom Cruise with Magnolia, he was very excited to work with Adam Sandler for Punch Drunk Love. He absolutely loves Adam Sandler. He literally made it a goal to want to make a 90-minute movie, or around the 90-minute mark, starring Adam fucking Sandler. And he was able to make it happen. And holy shit, Punch Drunk Love, really good. I wouldn't necessarily put it in like the top half of his filmography, but that's the thing about his filmography. There's maybe only like 3 movies, arguably, maybe even just 2 movies, hell, maybe even just 1, that doesn't feel just phenomenal. And the rest of it is just either so uniquely made or just so well made that it may as well be in the conversation for some of the best films just ever to be conceived, either from that decade or just for all time. And Punch Drunk Love is definitely a highlight for the 2000s that I don't feel like was appreciated all that much back then as it is now. I think critics were not really able to make heads or tails of Adam Sandler in a dramatic role at the time, and I guess a lot of them found themselves scratching their heads at the specific narrative that Paul Thomas Anderson put in place. But for me personally, I think it still worked just so irrefutably well. And more importantly, it proved to a lot of people that Paul Thomas Anderson can make more than these just long 2.5 hour to 3 hour movies that feel like something out of a Robert Altman film or something out of a Scorsese film. I can't really think of much of anything that is similar to Punch Drunk Love, albeit there is a Robert Altman call out with that version of Harry Nilsson's He Needs Me from Robert Altman's Pie Pie. But yeah, after this point, after Punch Drunk Love, say goodbye to the 2000s for a little while, because we're going to the turn of the century, 1900s. Woohoo! With There Will Be Blood. And before I talk about There Will Be Blood, I just want you to understand how influential and how much of a groundbreaking moment this was for Paul Thomas Anderson to put out There Will Be Blood. Without There Will Be Blood, there would be no Phantom Thread. The movie that so many people say is their favorite of Paul Thomas Anderson's, as well as the best of Paul Thomas Anderson's, would not exist without There Will Be Blood. There will be no romance between Mr. and Mrs. Woodcock without a Daniel Plainview. And I guess on the subject of Phantom Thread, it's just irrefutably the best romantic film that Paul Thomas Anderson has put out so far. I just love Daniel Day-Lewis in this movie. I love Vicky Krieps in this movie. Leslie Manville is just fantastic as well. And for a good bit of the movie, as I'm watching just their really odd relationship, it just makes me feel good to watch. On top of that, I believe this is the first movie where Paul Thomas Anderson kind of just takes the reins on cinematography. Matter of fact, this is the only Paul Thomas Anderson movie that I can think of where there's not a credited cinematographer at all, despite technically PDA, I'm just going to call him PDA from now on, helming the camera in terms of cinematography, as I mentioned, and holy hell, it looks so good. I personally can't really think of any negative about Phantom Thread. The problem is there's like at least 2 other movies that I think are better, and that's not Phantom Thread's fault at all. But yeah, in addition to there being no Phantom Thread without There Will Be Blood, there will be no The Master without There Will Be Blood. This really interesting exploration of this Scientology-esque cult and Joaquin Phoenix's character's interaction with it as he's trying to find a place in society following World War II. There's just absolutely nothing like it. Joaquin Phoenix is great. Philip Seymour Hoffman probably puts out his best performance in a movie ever with this film. And also just one of many early Amy Adams performances pre-Arrival that is just so fantastic. Why did the Oscars snub Amy Adams for Arrival? Why? Why, Academy? And I definitely will say it's in the top half of his filmography for sure. I will say not every film post There Will Be Blood was a banger. Like, I mentioned Licorice Pizza before, and Inherent Vice, which, keep this in mind, it's an adaptation of a Thomas Pynchon film, just feels like he had too much dip on his chip. Like, don't get me wrong, good movie. Paul Thomas Anderson has never put out a bad movie, ever, and if he keeps this up, probably never will. But it just feels like there was a lot in terms of it having just a ginormous cast, probably his biggest cast since maybe Magnolia. And just like all this intrigue about this whole environment during this like neo-noirish early 70s. And it's fascinating and original and confounding, but also it just feels like it's all over the place to the point where I'm not even sure where the narrative intended to go at a certain point. But also still very much neo-noir in a lot of the ways I would expect a noir film to be. So, good movie, solid movie, just not an excellent movie in my opinion. But even then, There Will Be Blood set the stage for just how unique a Paul Thomas Anderson movie can be. Paul Thomas Anderson decided to look at this copy of Oil by Upton Sinclair and make one of the great American masterpieces, that is There Will Be Blood. And also a film that houses arguably the film where Daniel Day-Lewis invented acting. Holy hell, he not only was fantastic as Daniel Plainview, but you can definitely tell that Paul Thomas Anderson just worked his ass off in tandem with Daniel Day-Lewis to make the character Daniel Plainview just such a staple in fiction today. The cinematography was also stellar in this film. I believe Robert Elswith won the Oscar for cinematography that year, beating out Roger Deakins for No Country for Old Men. But, you know, No Country for Old Men got him back because they took every single Oscar that There Will Be Blood was nominated for. Which, by the way, is worth noting that this is the very first movie Paul Thomas Anderson will be nominated for picture and director for. Because previously he would only get nominated for screenplay. And a video about all 10 times he was nominated and all 10 times he lost will come later. There Will Be Blood felt like the crossing of the Rubicon in so many ways for Paul Thomas Anderson. He went from being this guy that was underneath the shadow of a lot of his influences and a lot of the greats, and definitely just somehow, some way pulled this out of his hat. A 2.5-hour long film about greed, about the degradation of your character and your soul because of your aspirations and your obsession. Just a fantastic movie. If you've never watched There Will Be Blood, you should definitely watch it. And I bring There Will Be Blood up specifically because, like I said, without There Will Be Blood, there would be no Phantom Thread, The Master, Licorice Pizza. By the way, I did not show these while I was talking about them, but I didn't need to. In the same way that there wouldn't be any of these films without There Will Be Blood, there will be no One Battle After Another without There Will Be Blood. And in turn, in my humble opinion, without There Will Be Blood, which to me was Paul Thomas Anderson's best movie, there will be no One Battle After Another, a return to non-period pieces, and in my opinion, Paul Thomas Anderson's best movie without There Will Be Blood. Just a fantastic film. I'll save more when I eventually review One Battle After Another, but it's just irrefutably Paul Thomas Anderson. There's just a lot of things as it pertains to his style of camera work, his needle drops in a movie, and just his overall take on storytelling that separates One Battle After Another from the average big budget action film or the big budget thriller film. And I just think it's his best film. Yesterday I was able to watch it for a second time, and everything that I loved about the movie, I ended up loving it more, and just overall, just everything I think that was great about it became greater and more clear to me. And I just can't really see it not being his best movie. There's just nothing like it. Nothing that I've ever seen like it. At the very least, nothing in terms of all the action films and the thriller films that have came out in the last 15 years like it. So yeah, that's why I think One Battle After Another ranks at number one for Paul Thomas Anderson's best movies. But yeah, if you need a whole little graph or a recap on the ranking as a whole, there will be a list linked into my Letterboxd, as well as just my Letterboxd. Please consider following me there, because I need followers desperately. And yeah, that's about it. What are your favorite Paul Thomas Anderson movies? And go ahead and give me your personal ranking in the comments, and let's compare them. But yeah, that's about it. Thank you for watching this video. It ended up being just a wee bit longer than I had originally intended, and I hope to see you in the next one. Hopefully the next one is when I review One Battle After Another, but no promises. This is your boy Chrysalis here, signing off.